Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today to this webinar. We have very interesting panelists with different experiences in academia and at various stages of their career. And we have lots of questions. Thank you, everyone that submitted their questions in advance. There's also a chance to ask additional questions, so should be a very interesting and engaging discussion. So first of all, I'd like all the panelists to introduce themselves. Pablo, do you want to start first?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. This is Pablo speaking from University of Paris, Sud. I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher working on immobilite modified materials for the photocatalytic production of hydrogen. And I will be happy to share my experience on reading habits.
Great. Yanis?
Yanis, yes. This is Yanis Arigiannis. I'm assistant professor at the University of Nicosia, Cyprus. I'm working on peptide chemistry. I teach organic chemistry and pharmaceutical chemistry. That's all.
Great, thank you. Daisy?
Hi, I'm Daisy. I am a first-year doctoral researcher at the University of Birmingham, and I'm part of a research group who is investigating what native speakers know about their own language for the purpose of improving foreign language teaching.
Great. Zeynep?
Hello, everyone. I am Zeynep. Currently, I am in the Netherlands. It's a sea research institute called Royal NEOS. I am a geologist by training, but focus on climate science and climate reconstruction in the past.
Great. And Ebru?
Hi, everyone. I'm Ebru Baykara. So I'm working as a postdoc researcher at University Koblenz-Landau in Germany. So I have a background in neurocognitive psychology, and right now I'm working with cognitive training as the main topic, and also do a lot of teaching in this topic. And I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Great. Thank you so much to our panelists. So this topic, this webinar is about the reading habits of academics. And I've split the questions that we've received into the themes that you can see now on the screen. So the first one will be specifically about the reading habit. So how often academics read papers, how on the phone, on desktop, and so on. Then the second theme is specifically about techniques that they use to manage their workload and all the information that they see everywhere, all the new papers that come out, how do they prioritize what to read. And then we'll touch on a couple of questions about peer reviewing, and then we'll finish with additional questions, including my favorite question that has been asked is in the final category. So let's start with the questions. So the first one, where do you find your research? Let's start with Daisy.
Okay, so there's a couple of places that I find new research the most often. The first of which is the Researcher app, which I am an ambassador for, and we all are. It's really good for keeping you really up to date with everything that's been published in your specified field, and it sends it right to your mobile. That's one of the key ways I keep up to date with new research. The other main one that I think I use is the website Academia. So when you when you go on there and you find a paper that you're interested in, it will pretty much every day send you similar papers right to your email address. That's one of the main ones I'm using at the moment.
Great. Pablo?
So in my case, I usually create notifications either in some reputed journals or in some specific editorials houses as well. Of course, now that I discovered Researcher app, it's been very helpful tool. And on top of that, I also use the ResearchGate.
Yeah.
That's very much in my case.
Okay. Yanis, where do you find your research?
Yeah. So I find everywhere. To be true. Everywhere. I mean, either in journals, scientific journals, or journals that they are for professionals. For in example, for us that we are work on pharmacy program, there are a lot of journals that they are for professional pharmacists. So you can find very nice articles there. And most of them, they have other citations. So then you can go to the original paper and you can find your article that you are interested in.
Okay.
In other words, you can, through your cell phone, you can add some keywords and you can receive every morning specific articles about the subject that you are interested in.
Okay, thank you. So the second question, how often do you browse searching for new papers? Should we start with Pablo?
So yes, in my case, I work specifically in physical chemistry of materials, and I would dare to divide my work distribution in mainly two periods. Namely, all to the related to the experimental lab work, and then the second period is mainly to the write and dissemination of the results I obtain. So during the first period, I usually base on an existing protocol. I try to reproduce, and then I compare the evaluation and characterization results. If they are in a good agreement with literature, with previous reported works, I can start applying my experimental strategy to keep on further the research in my domain. So in this case, I would say that the frequency of searching new articles is quite low. It depends on the good reproducibility of the synthesis of the materials.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Otherwise, for their publication should be used to implement a hybrid protocol to properly control the conditions. Within the writing section, I have a higher frequency of searching specific publications because it's the time I compare my results, and it's I need to check specifically similar works that have already been published and try to explain critically the distinctive differences that I obtain in my materials compared to the materials they have reported using the same type of techniques.
Okay.
So yeah, that's very important to select and identify good papers.
Yeah.
And it could consume quite some time.
Yeah. What about using it? How often do you browse searching for new papers, let's say in a week?
It depends on the two type of periods, but namely I could say from 5 to 20 hours per week.
Wow.
Oh, really?
Oh,
wow. Okay, thank you, Pablo. Zeynep?
In my case, it's a bit because I have a Google Scholar alert for keywords. So usually I receive 2, maximum 3 emails per week. And then sometimes it is 5 to 20 papers with keyword in the email. Then sometimes I end up looking for 3 hours straight for those papers reading or noting down.
Yeah.
But it really depends on the alerts I get, like from ResearchGate or Google.
Yeah. Okay. Ebru?
So it is a little bit like Zainab. I also get notifications. So usually I check those notifications and see whether there is anything relevant and interesting for me. And I try to keep reading papers to like a couple of like 1-2 days a week. And also, like, because I'm teaching, sometimes I do before teaching whether there's anything new that I missed that I can share with the students. So I check quickly whether there is anything to not miss it. But usually also I get the notifications when there's something new.
Okay. This kind of, all of you kind of answered the third question as well, which is how much time does it take every week? So pretty much depends on how many new alerts, new papers you come across this week, but it could be anything between 2 to 5 hours. Okay, and where do you read? So do you, so you, Ebru, mentioned that you read before classes. Do you have like a standard place where you want to kind of read papers? Do you do it at the university, at home, during your commute? Where do you read?
For me, well, I prefer to read at my office because I have also a big screen, which makes it easier. So I have a really short commute, so that's not very relevant for me. But of course, sometimes I just bring it to home and read on the weekends a little bit if I need to catch up, or in the evenings. But I try to do it mostly at the office.
Yeah. Yanis, what about you? Wait, you're on mute. I'm going to unmute you. 1 second. Yeah, go on.
Okay. Usually in the lab or in the office and at home, because I'm working for the home or for the work. So I'm usually in the lab. Because I have some free time during the labs. So I prefer to have a peek the notification, and if I found something useful, then I start study the paper.
Yeah. Okay, and then do you feel that you dedicate enough time to find out what's new, Yanis?
This is a big question mark. I don't know. I don't know what we mean enough time, because really these days I feel that we don't have enough time.
Yeah.
We don't have. Yeah. Really, we have so many information these days. I'm thinking when I was in my PhD candidate, so a lot of years before. So the problem is that you have a lot of information. You have to filter it and identify what is really useful for you.
Mm-hmm.
This is a real problem, because in many cases you can either from the abstract, or you have to go deep in the paper to find if something is useful, really useful for your research.
Yeah, thank you. Daisy, what about you? Do you feel that you dedicate enough time? Do you feel up to date?
I feel like I do. The things like they're getting sent the emails and notifications when new things published, like I said, with the researcher app and the academia, I do feel like I'm quite up to date, especially when I get close to submitting something, then I make sure I'm as up to date as possible, because people will definitely pick up on that if you're not. So it does depend on where I am in the researching process to how up to date I feel, I guess.
Yeah. And do you, so I'm going to jump to the last question here because you just mentioned it. Do your reading patterns change prior to submitting a paper, or depending on your, basically your academic cycle?
Yeah, definitely they change. I do tend to do a lot more reading at the very beginning of a project to get a good sort of theoretical background in it, and on the methodology that I'll be using. And I would say that although I definitely read less towards the end of a project and near submitting a project, I still like, if anything is published, then it is even more relevant to read it at that time. So I read less, but it's more important to read anything that does come out in your area.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so Zeynep,
Yeah.
do you read any papers or browse on desktop or mobile? What's your preferred?
For browsing, sometimes if I am commuting, for example, mobile, but mostly desktop.
Yeah. Okay. What about the others? Yanis, desktop, mobile? Wait, you're on mute again. Wait.
The mobile.
Mobile?
Yeah. When I'm at home, I prefer relaxing in the sofa and take the ultra book on my knees, and I prefer the ultra book. So it depends. But I also use mobile a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. Pablo? Pablo is on mute.
To find the new research,
yeah.
I think it's very important to make the remark about participating in international conferences, because in my personal case, I usually try to identify like the most vibrant international conferences in my domain, either in Europe or also in the technological hubs around the world, namely United States, Japan, Canada, Brazil, etc. So that's something that it should be told, to try to know what it's the fresh ideas that are going on in the research fields. And of course, once you identify these authors, you can also check the Google Scholar and some other profiles.
Yeah. Okay, so that kind of leads us to the second theme, which is how do you prioritize and how do you manage your workload to be more productive? Let's start with Ebru. So Heather Beach from Microbiology Society asked, how do you keep up with the new research being published?
Well, as I said, I have this notifications, so there are some authors and some groups that are working in the topic that I'm interested in. So every time their paper is cited, I get notifications, and I have like some basically words that I'm interested in, then I get notifications. And I skim the papers basically to try to really see what is relevant, because as Yanis said, it's impossible to keep up or read everything fully in detail. And I mean, some articles are really high quality, some studies, and some studies are not really, or doesn't add too much to the knowledge that we already have. So it's really, I try to basically spend more time to select what I really read to detail, in a detailed way, and that's how I try to keep up with what's going on.
Thank you. So moving on, Zeynep, do you follow any authors in your field on social media? Do you use social media for research?
Yeah. Recently, last couple of months, I started using Twitter quite often. So, and in my field, excuse me, there are especially US scientists. They are really active on Twitter, and they share their research results firsthand there. So there. Some of them really well known. Also, I'm a climate scientist, so I think with this all global warming and climate change issues, it's quite active right now.
Yeah, it's a hot topic, definitely.
Yeah, that's why we are trying to use it more often than like 5 months ago, I guess.
Yeah. What about Daisy? You're in social sciences. Do you find that academics are active on social media?
Absolutely, yeah. There's lots of academics in my field that are really active on social media.
Yeah.
I'm not I'm not the best at Twitter, but I am trying to do more, and I'm trying to follow more people. I do follow a lot of academics who work at my university in the field, and that is great because it makes me aware of local events that would be relevant to me, sort of talks and lectures and workshops. So that's great. But no, I think it's a great idea to follow people on Twitter, especially, so you can keep up to date.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on, Pablo, what are your favorite tools for discovery? Do you use databases?
In particularly favorite tools, I don't know, because I use different ones depending on what I'm looking for. If it's some specifics, I usually go to Google. If it's something that just to keep up with the research, I get to know the notifications I have, and maybe to check whether in LinkedIn or ResearchGate the authors I already know. So it really depends on which interest I am.
Yeah. What about you, Yanis? Any tools that you use? Let me unmute you.
I use CFinder or ChemSpider. They are some nice databases from American Chemical Society. I have to do this because in many cases you have to find if there is any patent for the chemical compound that you synthesize that you don't know. Maybe sometimes you can you cannot find something in the paper, but everything is in the patent. So you have to follow both of them. And the other is Google Patents. In there, you can find specific properties of the compound that you want to synthesize. So you have to follow databases.
Yeah, great. And how so again, I'll ask you the next question, because you use quite a few different kind of tools and sources. How do you organize all these resources that you use? How do you manage everything?
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. Usually what I'm doing, I have a PowerPoint, and I separate in specific with specific schemes the paper discovery resources. So I put everything in the PowerPoint, and then I share the knowledge to the rest of the students that I supervise in order to include everything in this PowerPoint. And so everyone, it is not like a journal club, it looks like, but by this way we multiply the information, because everyone can add something, but if it is in the PowerPoint, so there is no need to repeat the paper.
Yeah.
And also, here in the university, we have some other tools, so we can share the knowledge among the team. It is like, we can say, an update and another version of the traditional journal club we had some years before.
Okay, so kind of you shared
I don't know if there was an internet connection stable. That's why I lost the connection. Okay, everything is clear. I don't know if you need more details.
No, that's fine. I think we heard. You answered the question well. So, do you Daisy, let's move to you for the next question. Do you use any kind of directories, indices, abstracting services to find research?
I'm not sure if you would count it as that as such, or to read research or to find research.
To kind of discover new papers, essentially.
No, I don't think I do, unfortunately. I think I'm the wrong person to ask for this question.
Okay. Anyone else? Pablo?
I think I'm also a wrong person to ask this question.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay, so unless someone has an answer, but we kind of mentioned a few databases and directories. Okay, so interesting question. Why would you browse a journal instead of searching on, let's say, Google Scholar? And what are you hoping to achieve when you browse? I think Yanis mentioned that he has kind of favorite journals that he goes back to. Can you answer that question, Yanis?
Why I browse a journal?
Yeah.
Yeah, because in the journal you can use keywords, and you can receive in your email continuously everything that comes out. Every paper, every moment that comes out a new paper, and it contains the keywords that you have, you can receive it in the email. In Google, in many cases, you can also have advertisements, or you have to search more, because in other cases, actually, the system that Google works, it's quite, it looks like it's a kind of advertisement. An example, if you Google some keywords, you can, the first at least 3 sites, they are sites about sales or whatever. Especially in my field, that there are chemical substances, so chemical compounds. So you have to get in papers. I prefer to search in the journals, not in Google. Actually, I use Google in some cases when the journals are locked or I cannot have access, because in some cases you can Google can give you a link on ResearchGate, so you can find the paper you want through ResearchGate.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Hope that answers the question. So that's a question that I had as well for academics, and I'll address it to Zeynep. How do you manage your work-life balance? Do you switch off, let's say, around the winter holidays or during the summer or weekends? Or are you still tempted to do research and browse what's new?
I am tempted because it comes to my email.
Yeah.
Suddenly my interest goes slides, and then just don't care about your holiday. I mean, because we are in research and we are out of curiosity of general things and science. So I don't think there's a really sharp distinction between work life and private life, I guess.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. What about Ebru?
Well, yeah, it's a bit difficult to have clear-cut distinction between your like free time and your work time, yeah, because we are not really working on a 9-to-5 job, which is sometimes good, but sometimes it's really difficult to shut off. But I try to, at least on holidays. So I don't manage to do it always on weekends, but I try to really switch off during holidays. I try to not check my email every day, at least, just maybe, you know, once every other day or something, and once a day. On the weekends, I try to just maybe work one day and leave the other day off. So because I think otherwise it gets a bit too overwhelming and you lose the energy and enthusiasm if you are working all the time. At least that's my point of view.
Yeah. That's what we notice in research as well. Our kind of usage stats are constant. There isn't really drop off during weekends, or let's say the winter holidays. It's constantly people browsing new papers. Okay, so interesting topic. So all of you mentioned that there's a lot of papers published all the time. So how do you sift through all that content? The first question is around personalized article recommendations. Do you use any tools that kind of recommend papers based on your reading? Mendeley Suggest, I think, has one. There's some others that basically use AI to give you recommendations. Pablo, do you use any of those tools?
So in my case, I sometimes I recommend some papers through ResearchGate. I think I devote a lot of time by using ResearchGate, because I don't know, in my domain specifically, it's quite update with all the research and the active researchers, scientists around the world. So sometimes, yes, Mendeley a bit, but very much in ResearchGate, I would say.
Okay. Daisy, any tools that you use for personalized recommendations?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned in one of the previous questions that I have an academia account, which means that when you download, or so you select on the website you want to download a paper, and pretty much every single day after that, it will recommend you a similar paper, whether it's a new paper or not, which is really good. I've found so many relevant papers in the last couple of weeks. And also, so it's not an automated thing, but just getting recommendations from my colleagues. So I like I said, I work in a research group, and so there's a whole office of 5 of us who are all working on similar things, and we'll often recommend each other things. So yeah, don't just work with the AI. Work with the real people too.
Yeah.
Recommend it.
Yeah, great. What about how do you assess kind of the trustworthiness? So how do you assess whether to read a paper or not? Let's start with you, Daisy.
I think one of the main things that I will do, especially if I'm looking for like a really relevant paper, I will see whether I recognize the author's name, and also see whether I recognize the journal it's been published in. If I recognize either of those, it's a great sign. Again, I guess the third thing that I look for is whether they have referenced things that I'm already familiar with. That's the other thing that I'll say. So if I know at least one of those I recognize, then it's like, okay, this is probably going to be something that I can trust. Yeah.
And we received a question, and you mentioned as well that you kind of assess the journal that the journals that the paper is published in. But the question is, why do you browse specific journals rather than other websites? Do you do that, Daisy?
So go specifically to journals rather than through...
Yeah. So let's say, specific journal title rather than...
So I wouldn't say that I would browse specifically through them. I'm not averse to it at all. I just don't tend to, because there are other ways to do it that are available. But there are definitely journals that not only that I recognize, but that I know usually contain things that are relevant to me. So it's definitely something that I pay attention to. But I wouldn't say that I browse specifically through the journals, because they usually, even though they're specific to a field, they can be pretty broad reaching. So if I just search through there, then it could come up with some irrelevant stuff as well.
Yeah. What about Pablo? Do you browse specific journals instead of other websites?
Well, yes, in my field, there are like some top journals that they also aim to submit some manuscripts. So I keep update on those journals just to check what's the orientation and what the innovation impact they ask for. And so yeah, it's that's basically how I choose the specific journals.
Yeah.
If I may, I would also extend the last question regarding
Yeah,
the
sure.
trustworthiness.
Yeah.
As Daisy mentioned, I also have a look on the reputation of the author. And a good indicator of it is the age index. Also, I check how many years is this person working in the field, and how regular does the author publish works. And based on that criteria, I get to know how reliable is the author and their works by consequence.
Yeah. What about you, Yanis? How do you assess the trustworthiness of a paper without reading in detail?
Look, I have a quick look in the abstract, and then go directly to the conclusion. If I found anything useful in the conclusion, I go deep in the paper, or else I go to the next paper.
Okay.
Because in the conclusion you can have at least a quick view of the results. And depending, you can a lot of times you can understand from the paragraph of the conclusion about the type of the paper. I don't know if you got what I'm saying, but when the conclusions they are just 3 lines, you can understand that definitely the paper, maybe there is nothing important in the paper.
So you kind of assess the substance through the conclusion.
There is no meaning to spend time. Go to the next paper.
Yeah. So to all of the panelists, is anyone reading book publications, and how frequently?
I typically don't go for sort of physical books as such, because it's just so much easier to access everything online. But I will read sections of books or paragraphs, or not paragraphs, but chapters of books online if they come up in the searches. But yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else?
In my case, usually book publications are like reviews. So if I want to, I think right before starting working on a new paper for the introduction part, I go to those reviews, and they are usually book chapters.
Yeah.
And then then search for citations and the publications maybe I missed from that for the introduction part on the discussion part.
And Yanis?
Definitely, yes. Actually, my 2 last publications, they are in book chapters. So, and they are reviews. Yeah. It's a good starting point, especially for the young students, to read the book chapter.
I agree.
especially for the young students.
Great, thank you. And what factors influence you when selecting research material? Let's ask Ebru.
So I would also go for the journals that I recognize, I know, and that I would also send my own article. And I'm not, I mean, of course, there are some big names and some people that you know working in your field, and you would check for these people. But of course, there are also, I think it is also interesting to find research from younger researchers and groups that are, you know, just becoming known. So I would more look for the journal, I think, than the authors. And I guess also I would go to the reference list and see whether they include things that are mostly known in the field, and articles that are kind of, you know, should be mentioned and cited. And of course, I mean, then you go to abstract and see whether it really is relevant for you. But yeah.
Yep. And Zeynep, what influences you?
Well, yeah, journals have a big impact, of course. But I don't care when it comes with the alerts and the keywords. So I don't read it. It's not the first thing I check which journal is published. The first thing I check is the title and abstract, and if it's interesting or not, and then go to the figures and graphs maybe shortly.
Right.
Then if it is interesting, I'm curious who did the research, because then I have a look. So this is not my first concern, to be honest. If the topic is much the first one.
Much more important, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so kind of a question to all of you. How do you feel about preprints? Who reads papers in preprints? Yanis, I can see you nodding.
Yeah, as I told previously, yes, I'm reading everything that comes out, and I'm interested in right time exactly when it comes. It's this system with notifications in the email, in the cell phones. It is very useful. You can have a quick idea, a quick look what is going on. So yeah, I suggest also to the students to study preprints.
Yeah. Pablo, how do you feel about preprints?
So in my case, not much, since I prefer published works. Sometimes I feel that the preprints are very not necessarily enough information to screen about the work. So that's why I'm more oriented to published works in my case.
Okay, and Daisy, as a social scientist, what do you feel about preprints?
I personally haven't read many myself. I understand the appeal of people reading them, things that have been peer reviewed, printed already. So I would like to find out more info about them and what preprints are like in my field.
Yeah, thank you. So then moving on to the theme about sifting through content, we kind of touched on the first question that was asked, what factors influence you? So some of you mentioned that you read the conclusion and the abstract. Some of you look at the author, some of you look at the journal that's published. So I think that question is answered. Philippa, if you want to ask another question, you can pop in the chat box. What do you do when you're peer reviewing papers? I'll start with Yanis, because you mentioned that you've peer reviewed you're a peer reviewer for a few journals. Yeah.
First of all, I'm looking for plagiarism. And, because this is a pity story, but unfortunately, especially from countries that they are not familiar with the English language, they copy whole paragraphs. I can tell you a story some years before that actually all the introduction in a paper in a very nice, in a very good journal. I was a reviewer there, and all the introduction there was a copy pieces from other journals, and I found out because the references, the enumeration there was 1, 2, 3, and then 23, 24. Actually, it was like a joke. I rejected directly, but yes, the first thing that I'm searching is the plagiarism.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Zeynep, what do you do when you're peer reviewing papers? How do you search for similar articles?
Well, I check the cited articles first, I guess, or not thoroughly, of course, but it's just a scan. Most of the papers I reviewed so far is related to my PhD work, so I was quite confident about it, about the literature work and everything. So, so the first thing I check, I think, what was the last publications they cited, if it is relevant or it is updated. So, for example, the last paper I actually reviewed was missing a lot of important results from last 3 years. So I made a huge comment on it.
Oh, wow. Thank you. And Ebru, what do you do when you're peer reviewing papers?
So I do the same things as Yanis and Zeynep. So sometimes I recently also had like a case where the writing style throughout the paper was quite changing, let's say. So when you have a suspicion that some parts might be taken from other resources. So, and of course, I also check the cited papers, that they are up to date with where what they are citing. And I think also if it's like a very specific topic, I would also do a keyword search and try to find whether anything similar is done, basically just looking at the titles and shortly maybe to abstracts to make sure that it is adding something new and not like very similar work has been done that they did not cite, or maybe that it's just came out recently just to have an idea about what's going on in the field.
Yeah, and how do you sift through all these papers?
So if I do a literature search, it's also usually like topics closer to what I'm working in when I receive a review paper. So I already know what is going on, but it's also sometimes a very specific paper. So usually when you go that specific, you can eliminate many other works. So I look for the methodology specifically, whether it is used exactly like that, or and whether the research question has been posted before. I think I stick to the mainly title and the conclusion of the abstract. And
and Pablo, how do you manage the reading of large number of papers and sifting through all this content? Pablo?
Yes, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
So how do you manage reading of large number of papers and sifting through all the information when you're preparing for reviewing an article?
Well, that's actually one of the tasks I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
Because I'm working in a new material, let's say a new field. So, so to chunk large amount of information, I usually look for specific keywords, and I add most of these publications in a Mendeley, and I attribute to this to each publication and a specific keyword that is a highlight. Then when I come back to the subject in the Mendeley database, it's easy for me to know what are the publications that are related to a specific keyword in order to divide the reviewing article in different sections. So this is very much my strategy. Sometimes I also create like a PowerPoint file just to have in mind the graphical abstract that in materials it gives like the very first impression of what is the publication is talking about. And as Yanis already mentioned, I also skim the paper usually in the conclusions first, and sometimes in a specific technique inside the discussion section.
Okay, thank you. And we have a question coming in through the chat box, which is, do you have a preferred format for reading? So that would be on a web page, so HTML, PDF, or a printed version. And why do you prefer that format? Let's start with you, Pablo. Do you have a preferred format for reading?
Well, I can share for as long as it's one of my tasks now. I'm quite of the old school. I like to print, and I like to use markers, and sometimes I do some small designs like to be aware of a specific phrase or section to have it in mind when I'm writing in the manuscript, so I can pick up the printed document and try to rewrite it in my own words. But I've already have this like old style technique that it has been working quite efficient since I can also separate the which publications are related to a specific topic and so on and so forth. So it really facilitates the things for me when I go down to write the specific section on the review manuscript.
Yeah. Ebru, what about you? Do you have a preferred format for reading?
So usually I like to have PDFs of the articles, and I use OneNote to take notes about what is the main findings and what is interesting about the paper. And in OneNote, you can also put the PDF file next to it. So I have kind of an organization of where to find the papers rather than looking all around my computer. But if a paper is very, very important in the topic, and I'm going to go back and forth and check the details again and again, then I would like to print it and have it on my table and also work on it with highlighting and putting arrows and underlining things. But other than that, usually PDFs.
Yeah. Daisy, do you have preferred format and why?
Yeah, I also like to print things and have them have a physical copy of most things that I like to read, because that means I can highlight and make sort of scribbly little notes in the corners, just for things that come to mind. And then once I get to the end of reading something, I will type up any notes that I've made. Yeah.
Yeah. Zeynep?
The same. I go with the PDF because I can make a comment on it as well, like bubbles and everything. But if I really need to read through, like Ebru said, it highlights and everything, and especially if I am going on a long trip, on a train or something, I print them.
Yeah. And Yanis?
I prefer, despite my age, I prefer a PDF. I can highlight with on the screen, you can circle, you can do whatever you want with PDF. Actually, you can make comments. So yeah, in general, I prefer PDF.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. And I think that might be the last question. If anyone has questions, please type them now in the chat box, and I'll ask them. So that's a quite deep question, I think. So let's start with Yanis. If you could change one thing about academic publishing, what would it be?
Oh, great question.
Yeah.
I could say that I would change the reviewing process.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I can tell you a story. I was reading some papers because I was preparing a few days before a course for our master, and I was reading a story 25 years before when a researcher in Hungary published, sent for publication a paper, and received the acceptance after 2 years. And meanwhile, the editor of the journal published 2 papers in Nature with some results of the first author. So for me, the time of reviewing is critical, especially nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
I ask from every time that I have to publish, I ask a quick answer. I prefer a quick rejection than waiting for a month or more than a month for an answer. I prefer to have a rejection in 1 week, and I will try to publish my manuscript in another journal. Yeah, the time is critical nowadays.
Yeah, that's true. Ebru, what would you change about academic publishing?
I would definitely wish that there would be more practices like pre-registration in publishing and open science practices that would be more frequent. So that would actually take the burden, or like take the stress from the researchers that they need to do and find something publishable rather than, you know, focusing on doing good research and having a good project. So that's why, so I think a little bit the publishing of positive results, and that we are unaware of many research being done in the world, that makes us lose a lot of time and money and effort. So I would be happier if there would be more transparency, and also null results and negative results would be available when the projects are well justified and designed. So that's one thing that I would change.
Yeah, thank you very much. Daisy?
This is a bit of a niche one, but the one thing that I want to change about sort of academic publishing, academic writing, is to make academic writing easier to read for everyone. particularly if English isn't your first language, trying to get through an academic paper it can just be such a real slog. I think it should be in plain English or plain whatever language it is written in. It makes it more accessible to everyone, and it makes it less of a chore for anyone to read. Yeah, I think just write it in a way that's enjoyable. But I feel like that's definitely a task it's definitely not going to happen anytime soon. But I can dream.
Thank you very much, Zeynep.
Open access.
Yeah.
Open source. Yeah, I think it is. It's getting a bit out of control right now. That everyone has to pay a lot of money to be able to read our results. So, yeah. And at the moment, all the open access in my field, we have to still, as authors and the project, we have to pay a lot of money to be able to publish there. So maybe, hopefully, this money situation gets a bit lower and science will be open.
Thank you. And Pablo, what would you change?
So yeah, I pretty much agree with all the other panelist answers. They have already covered the most crucial answers, I suppose. I just take the opportunity to point it out, yes, the way how the editorials works. Sometimes, yes, the way to publish the work that it has to be paid, and also the universities have to pay a significant amount of money. And if you have a look a bit deeper, most of the research is done with public money. And this is quite controversial and is still a debate. That's why there was some problematic with the researcher that created the ESI Hub, that she tried to get the open access for most of the people. So I think, yeah, that's also my orientation, going for the open access and maybe reduce, and the best case scenario, don't pay for the research that it's already been funded by public money.
Yeah, thank you. So a related question came to the chat box, which is, how do you feel about open access? Do you think it helps or hinders some authors? It's a question from Abby Lawa from IC Publishing. Let's ask Daisy.
I don't know much about open access myself. I think it's a great thing if you're looking for papers, but I don't know so much about how it affects the authors that are on the other side of that research. But I think it's a great thing particularly for students who are looking for new papers.
Yeah, and then Zeynep, that was the first thing that you wanted to change to make it more open access. How do you feel that affects authors?
Well, I don't think there is a negative effect on authors. Just the biggest thing is that if you are not part of a big project, it's really difficult to find extra funding for it. So that is one discouraging thing for the authors. Like I was lucky enough to work in big grants, like EU grants and everything. So there was always an open access money for publication.
Yeah.
So if you are not part of such a project, or like if you are from a developing country, then the chances of publishing open access is limited.
Yeah, and Yanis, as an author that you published quite a lot of papers, how do you feel about open access?
Okay. Really, I don't have problem to publish in open access.
I think there's a issue with the internet. Okay.
I think also this what happens with the internet these days because
Okay, I think I'll move on to, yeah. I'll have to move because I think there was an issue with the internet. Anyway, I think most of the panelists spoke about open access, so I think this question is covered. That was all the questions that we had. Thank you everyone for submitting your questions. Thank you to our lovely panelists for providing the answers. Hopefully these were very useful. I certainly found them very, very interesting and insightful. I've left my email address here. I didn't introduce myself, but I'm the head of marketing and researcher. So if you have any questions, either to